morning everybody, it's Al from Barnfindmotorcycle. I hope you're doing okay today. So today I'm out in the garage doing a test on the Power Commander that's fitted to my Aprilia Futura. So I've noticed that things have been running a bit rich lately, so I wanted to check the map in terms that was installed and originally set up. So the original map on here was actually set up to use a set of quill end cans. So now I've got a modified stock end can. I wanted to do a bit more custom work around the mapping on here. Now, a lot of people have moved away from Power Commanders recently for the future and gone to something called TuneECU. So that allows you to essentially modify the fuel mapping, things like ignition timing, run all sorts of diagnostics and so on. So there's a lot more you can do within that software. And it's free to download as well, and plus you've got access to the available connectors and so on online, which you can buy for quite cheap, and you can do it via a Bluetooth connection. So if you're using TuneECU, all you need is one of these OBDL connectors, and this is a Bluetooth one, and you can plug this directly into the Futura, and you're rocking and rolling pretty much in terms of getting into the ECU and starting tests and modifications if you want to. But back in the day, probably the sort of the early 2000s, the Power Commander seemed to be the way to go. So it doesn't give you much beyond the actual changing of the fuel injection mapping that's going into the engine, so you haven't got any ignition timing or anything like that. But it allows you to have a good play around and obviously adjust it to modified exhausts and so on. So that's going to be my task today. As you can see on the top of the bike, I've got the gaso tester rigged up, and I've got the two selectors for the front and rear cylinder. So I've already done a balance on these, so you can see on here that I rigged up the carb tune to check the actual balancing of the throttle bodies, and that seemed okay, so there's no problems in there whatsoever. So the objective for today is to essentially create a new modified Power Commander map. So that's the one I've got in front of me now. So I've basically saved a copy of this offline, so I can always go back to baseline, and this is the one I'm going to change throughout the rev range. So as you can see here, throttle position, obviously 2, 5, 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, and that represents the percentage of throttle. And then obviously this is the RPM calibration as well, so you can see things essentially moving through the rev range. So as I move through here, you can obviously change these values up and down or minus if you want to lean it off significantly. So that's going to be the work today. It'll probably take me about an hour or so to get it where I need it to be, and obviously run a few tests. But I hope you're having a good day and able to get out into the garage and do a few things. So the last video I updated you on the brakes on the 750, so they're all bled out now and working pretty well. So I need to take that bike out for a run. But one thing I would suggest when you're doing the 750 brakes, it actually suggests that you bleed the brakes off of the bike. Obviously put them above the master cylinder to get the air out of them, and then obviously once they're done, put them back on the bike. This can be a bit arduous if you haven't got things to fully compress the pistons inside of the calipers. So rather than go through all of that nonsense, to be honest, I use a vacuum pump here to pump plenty of brake fluid through the calipers, and then that gets obviously fluid all the way through the system. And actually you can get the most of the air out of the brake caliper just by getting your hand in between where the brake lines are and giving them a good rummage around. You'll see all of the air come back through the master cylinder. So I would say probably about half an hour's work to actually do that, rather than mess around with all of the calipers off the bike and so on. So that's pretty much what it took me with the vacuum pump, and just basically working the lines to get the air out. It's a bit more difficult with double banjo bolts if you don't run a splitter, I would say, but a bit of effort there, and it makes life a lot easier, especially if you're running smaller 17-inch wheels on these, because you've got less clearance between the caliper and the inside wheel rim. So getting those calipers on and off is a real pain in the arse, to be fair. And if you're doing that with things like the brake line's already connected up, that's an even worse headache. So there's a bit of a tip there for you. Let me know if that works out for you. So I've got my coffee on the go now, so the next job for me is I'm going to start the bike up, and then get an initial CO reading, I need to recalibrate the gaso tester to around 2% carbon dioxide. I've had it sitting calibrating in fresh air for a little while, so I need to knock that back a little bit before I start the bike, warm it up and see where we are in terms of CO readings. So once I've got all that running, I'll probably drop another video on, and I hope you're having a good day, and take care.